Welcome to the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I'm your host, Nicole Davidson, and in this podcast, we'll explore the art and science of negotiation in real-world situations. Whether you're negotiating a business deal, asking for a raise, or trying to resolve a conflict with a colleague or loved one, negotiation is an essential skill that can help you achieve your goals and build better relationships. Through interviews with experts, real-life stories, and practical tips and techniques, we'll deep dive into the strategies and tactics that can make you a better negotiator. From understanding your own negotiation style, to reading body language, handling difficult conversations, and overcoming common challenges, this podcast will give you the tools you need to negotiate with confidence and achieve your objectives. So whether you're a seasoned negotiator looking to refine your skills or someone who's new to the game, join us as we explore the world of negotiation in real life. In this episode of Negotiation in Real Life, I speak with Doug Noll. Doug left a successful career as a trial lawyer to become a peacemaker. His calling is to serve humanity, and he executes his calling at many levels. He is an award-winning author, teacher, trainer, and a highly experienced mediator. Doug's work carries him from international work to helping people resolve deep interpersonal and ideological conflicts to training life inmates to be peacemakers and mediators in maximum security prisons. His fourth book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less, was published in 2017 and is now in 4 languages and in its second printing. Doug is the co-founder of Prison of Peace and creator of the Noll Affect Labelling System. In 2012, Doug was honoured by California Lawyer magazine as California Attorney of the Year. In our discussion today, we speak about lessons in conflict resolution from Tai Chi, why a successful trial lawyer left legal practice, the extent to which our decisions are emotional rather than rational, what a redefined legal dispute resolution process may look like, the power of listening to emotions, how to use affect labelling and why it is so powerful, and much, much more. I hope you enjoy this week's episode of Negotiation in Real Life. So I'm delighted to welcome Doug Noll to Negotiation in Real Life today. Welcome to the podcast, Doug.
Thanks, Nicole. It's great to be here. I'm in California and you're a long ways away.
We are a long way away, but this is the joy of modern technology, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's
and
amazing.
Of course, soon we'll have AI taking it over and we won't even need to be on the podcast.
That's right.
But until those, yeah, I know it's kind of exciting and frightening at the same time, I think.
I think it's a little more, I think there's a lot more hype. I did a test with ChatGPT in November on listening skills. Completely wrong.
Yeah.
Completely wrong. There was not a thing in that essay that was right. It's only as good as the information that is given.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's very much, and the lowest common denominator will prevail. But I asked it to write a poem about mediation last year, and it gave me a lovely poem about meditation.
Yes, if we don't get people mixed up about the two words, right?
Exactly. I have been introduced once as a professional meditator.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, we digress before we've even started. What a great way to start the podcast. Before we go too much further down some windy paths, can I ask you to just explain to the listeners who you are and what you do?
You could describe me as being a very sophisticated peacemaker. I have a law degree. I was a practicing lawyer for 22 years, and I also have a master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. I went back to school mid-career in my late 40s to earn my master's degree and then left the practice of law to try to help people resolve conflicts in more sane ways than through litigation. Today, my work
connect well.
Today, my work takes me in places very dark, like maximum security prisons, where I train incarcerated people how to be peacemakers and mediators to stop prison violence, to the United States Congressional Budget Office, where I teach senior analysts how to de-escalate members of Congress and their staff, and everything in between.
Yeah, fascinating. And
I'm really looking forward to our chat because I think there are some things there. I mean, obviously, we're both peacekeepers. I tend to work more in the business space, but I'm sure there's some amazing lessons that you've got from these really challenging situations that are useful to everybody in business as well. I'd like to come back to the fact you said you were a lawyer and you left. Tell me a little bit about what made you leave the practice of law.
Well, it was a journey. It wasn't something that happened all of a sudden. In the mid 80s, in my 30s, I started studying martial arts, and I was awarded my second degree black belt in about when I turned 40. And after that, I started studying Tai Chi as a martial art. And Tai Chi has two really interesting paradoxes. The first is the softer you are, the stronger you are. And the second is the more vulnerable you are, the more powerful you are. Soft to be strong, vulnerable to be powerful. And I was at the height of my trial career at this point in time. So these paradoxes were very, very difficult to understand. But it turns out in Tai Chi, in order to move energy, to move the chi, to move the energy, you have to be soft. You have to be soft and vulnerable to be strong and powerful. So I started to absorb it into my soul. And one day in the mid-90s, I was in a courtroom trying a case, cross-examining somebody, and the thought came to me, what the heck am I doing in here? And that's when I decided, I'm done. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to do something else. And after that trial, I had a vacation planned up in central Idaho here in the U.S. to run a whitewater trip on the main Salmon River. So I spent 10 days with friends. I was basically by myself in my raft and thought about how many people I'd really served as a trial lawyer. And I could only count 5 people out of hundreds of cases that I really felt came out of the system better. And like you, I mean, I was a business and commercial civil trial lawyer, and I do a lot of commercial and business mediation and arbitration too, but I just wasn't helping people. Yeah. And I said, that's not who I am. I don't want to go another 20 or 30 or 40 years and only help 15 or 20 people.
Yeah.
So when I got after that trip, I was driving down out of the mountains to my office, and I heard a public service announcement for a new master's degree in peacemaking and conflict studies. And it caught my attention. I jotted the number down, and ultimately I enrolled. And so for 3 years, I was a full-time graduate student, a 3/4 time law professor, and a full-time trial lawyer.
That's amazing. That is an amazing story. And I think that's just so fascinating. But I'm really interested that you've said out of all the people that you worked for, you felt there was only 5 that came out of the system better. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Well, as you know, litigation is, when especially in business and commercial litigation, if you have to file a lawsuit against somebody, you're running a salvage operation. And it's very unlikely that you're ever going to recover everything that you've lost for a whole bunch of different reasons, including having to pay your attorney's fees, especially if there's no attorney's fees clause, the cost of litigation, which is unbelievable, the risk that you might not win. And even if you do win, that doesn't mean you're going to get paid. Yeah. Because all you get is a judgment. That judgment doesn't force somebody to pay you. Now you have to chase them down and find their assets and seize their assets and sell them to get paid. So, and if you've been sued, especially if you've been sued in a frivolous lawsuit, you've got the same problem. You're never going to be made whole. And you're going to have to pay money to settle the case, even though you didn't do anything wrong. Yeah. So in either situation, you're not going to. It's just not going to be made right. But there were a few big cases I had. I mean, really big cases where I was able to sue insurance companies for fraud and recover tens of millions of dollars from my clients. And in those cases, it was life changing. Yeah. But that was, 1 out of 100.
You've got to be a patient lawyer to get your satisfaction that way.
You start a lawsuit, and some lawsuits will go for 10 years before they're finally finished. Yes. Here in the United States, the average length of a lawsuit, if you include an appeal, is going to be 5 years.
Yeah, and I think it's not very different here.
Yeah, and so how can you be made whole if you were injured 10 years ago and you're waiting all this time to find out whether or not you actually got a judgment that can be enforceable? And I thought I got so frustrated. And then, of course, it's so adversarial. I was fighting with my partners over money. I was fighting my clients to get paid. Of course, I'm fighting the opposing counsel and their clients. You're fighting the courts. It's just all one big, massive fight. Yeah. it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And I learned, that's what I learned when I went back to school. There are so many better ways to solve these problems other than through litigation. Litigation is the last resort.
Yeah.
And then only if you have to.
Totally. I'm on the same page. And, part of my goal with this podcast is actually to share that message, because I think one of the challenges is when people think of dispute resolution, most people aren't familiar with the legal process. What they've seen about the legal process is the very glamorized, dramatized versions that we get in Hollywood films and, series like, back in my days, it was LA Law, but then you've got Suits, and it's nothing like the reality. And that's why I love having people like you coming and talking about those experiences. And I guess more importantly, that moves us into, well, what are some of these better options and how are they working? And you were saying you're dealing particularly with negotiations in emotional and high intensity situations. What have you learnt about that would have changed the way that you practiced law?
What I've learned is that we have a false assumption about human nature. We assume that humans are rational, and we've been told this for 4,000 years. But the truth is, from neuroscience, is that we're 98% emotional and only 2% rational. Every single decision we make is an emotional decision. And had I known that and understood the implications of that when I was practicing law, I would have handled many of my cases very differently than I did. But because in the law, we're all steeped in this concept of the reasonable person and the rational standards, we don't question the underlying assumptions of the law, which turn out to be flawed. And as a result, it leads us into really bad decision making.
And there's nothing in law school about how to understand human emotion, how to understand the person.
In fact, it's exactly the opposite. The whole purpose of the legal curriculum, and at least in the Anglo-American curriculum, same thing what you folks have in Australia, is to divest the conflict of all humanity and emotion and look at it as simply abstractions that we call rules of law. And the reason that people hate lawyers so much is because we lawyers have been trained to look at a problem and not really look at the human side of the problem, but only to look at the so-called legal side of the problem. I mean, there is some benefit to that, but in terms of helping people, give people really great advice and really help them decide what the best process is, lawyers are horrible at it because the emotionality was squeezed out of them in law school. And only after you've been practicing for 30 or 40 years do you see lawyers coming back and seeing humanity and being able to offer wise advice. It takes them 40 years to relearn it. And, that's a real problem.
Absolutely. That's so important that if we put the people back and, my favorite thing to think about is, we're living with this adversarial process that evolved a couple of hundred years ago at least. But if we started from scratch, if you use all of the knowledge that we've got now, if you went, let's apply design thinking process to the problem that we have, which is there are disputes in society that impact on people's lives and their businesses, and we need to find a way to resolve them. I suspect that design thinking process would not develop an adversarial system.
Well, maybe. There are some alleged benefits to having an adversarial system. The problem we have today, Nicole, is not the adversary system. It's that it's become unmoored from ethical standards. For example, here in California, if you were to look for the word zealous advocacy anywhere in our professional codes, you couldn't find it. And yet lawyers believe that they have an ethical requirement to be zealous advocates. Well, they do, but under a very narrow set of circumstances. Number one, they're in equal ability and equal resources and equal experience. Number two, the rules are well known. Number three, there is an impartial third party who's going to enforce the rules against the parties and the lawyers. Yeah. If any one of those three conditions is missing, then zealous advocacy does not apply. And what's happened is that lawyers have taken this concept of zealous advocacy and used it as an excuse for bullying and driving up legal bills and doing unnecessary pretrial discovery. So the whole idea of the adversarial process has been completely perverted and distorted.
That's really interesting. I haven't heard of that concept here. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but we sort of almost look at it from the other way, where lawyers have a duty not to pursue a case without reasonable grounds of merit. That's not the actual working.
We have exactly the same rule.
But this is where I see cases where the other side is saying, people defending claims that their lawyers are telling them have no prospects of success, right. And yet they're not actually making ethical complaints against, if they genuinely believe that, they're not actually taking it further and making ethical complaints about the lawyers pursuing it.
Right. And we're seeing that here in the United States with a number of lawyers who represented Donald Trump are now getting censured. They're getting disbarred, fined, because they brought a bunch of frivolous lawsuits without any grounds or basis. So the rule is being applied, but it's only being applied in very extreme cases.
Yeah.
I think if we were to define a system, I think the first thing that we would change the order of the process. The first process would be for people to be forced to try to negotiate with each other.
Yeah.
And there would be guidelines about what does a negotiation look like. There's this thing about good faith negotiation, which doesn't exist. That's a myth. I mean, there's no rule about good faith negotiation. You hear it all the time, right? Oh, they're negotiating. Yeah. And whenever I hear that, I know I'm dealing with a rookie negotiator. But I would have forced the parties to meet and confer and talk without lawyers. Can they figure it out themselves? If they can't figure it out themselves, then I would say the next thing they have to do is they have to mediate it with a mediator. But I would add that the process has to be an early neutral evaluation.
Yes.
So that the mediator, after the process is over with, can offer an opinion as to where the strengths and weaknesses of the case are, likely outcomes, and kind of help people get a reality check on their cases. And then, for at least for business and commercial cases, I would take away the jury and go straight to arbitration. And I wouldn't mess.
We have very few business cases with jury. It's interesting that in the UK, they're just trialling the requirement to mediate before you can issue proceedings in certain cases. And I'm a big believer that makes sense.
The only problem with that is that the skill level of the mediators generally is not high enough to be able to deal with people who are really angry at each other. And when people are really angry, all they want to do is hire the meanest junkyard lawyer they can find, and it's pain on the other side. And it takes a very skilled mediator to de-escalate that situation pre-litigation to get people to come to the table and try to work out something that's reasonable.
Yeah.
And that's the challenge. And most mediators don't have that skill.
That's true. I mean, there's no point forcing people to mediation if you don't have the skilled mediators to do the job.
Right.
But that brings me to a really nice segue to move back in and talk about negotiations rather than all the problems of the system, which I like to talk about. So you've talked about, needing to de-escalate these really angry people. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Have you got a story that you might share about how that looks in practice?
I've got a lot of stories. The way I developed this process was, as I talked in my master's degree program, as brilliant as it was and as brilliant as my teachers were, nobody knew how to de-escalate anything. They were relying on this old active listening, what I think your feeling is, Or doing nonviolent communication, Marshall Rosenberg stuff, which also doesn't work. And they taught it even though there was nothing, even though everybody knows it doesn't work. Well, I started studying neuroscience back in the mid-90s and started studying was very interested in peace and conflict in the brain. And that got me into studying emotions and emotional neuroanatomy and physiology and neurochemistry. And I didn't come up with any great solutions, but one day I had a very difficult mediation in 2005 in Santa Barbara, California, with a divorced couple. You'll love this. There was an $18,000 dispute, and they'd already spent $50,000 each in attorneys fighting each other.
Oh no!
Classic, right? Just
attorneys let that happen. It's like, anyway.
I know.
Keep going. I can't wait.
The lawyers called me and said, "Get rid of this case." Settle it. Well, they come into a conference room and they're well-dressed, upper middle-class people, seem very well presented. And I give them my opening, this is what we're going to do and how it's going to work and any questions, that sort of thing, what the ground rules are. And not even 10 seconds after I finished, they were standing up, pointing fingers across the table, yelling vile obscenities at each other, screaming. There have been knives on the table. There would have been blood on the floor, literally. I just sat, I was show-shy. What am I going to do with this, right? So the thought came to me, listen to the emotions. So I stopped them Moses parting the sea. Sit down, be quiet. And I said, all right, Susan, what I want you to do is I want you to listen to John, but instead of listening to his words, I want you to listen to his feelings and tell us what you think he's feeling. So we started in that process, and she stumbled a little bit in the beginning. I didn't know what I was doing. I was just making it up as I went along. But I noticed something very interesting. She moved, and within 5 minutes, she had moved from being a victim to feeling empowered.
Yeah.
And John completely quieted down. So that we heard John's story, and I had him do it in little pieces. And I said, well, what's he feeling now? And she would look at me and say, well, he's feeling mad. Well, tell him that. And she said, well, John, you're really angry and mad. And he got through his story. Then we reversed roles. I had him listen to Susan's emotions. And when they were all done, there was like 5 seconds of silence. And John puts his face in his hands like this, and he starts to sob, racking sobs for like 3 or 4 minutes. I mean, he was really intense. And he looks up and blows his nose and looks across the table and said, that's the first time you've listened to me in 25 years.
Wow.
And they sat there, and I just was quiet as a church mouse. He said, this is the stupidest lawsuit. We're so stupid to do this. Let's just get rid of it. And she said, absolutely. So I said, so you guys are going to contact your lawyers, dismiss the lawsuit. It's over with. Yep, it's over with. And with that, they got up, held hands, walked out, and had lunch with each other.
Wow. That's amazing.
And that was how it all started.
Yeah.
2 years later, Matthew Lieberman's lab at UCLA published a brain scanning study that showed what happens in the brain when you do this process, which turns out it's called affect labeling. And what happens is that you've got highly escalated emotions. When the emotions in the brain, emotional circuits of the brain are highly activated, they overwhelm the prefrontal cortex. No more thinking, it's all reactivity. Yeah. But when you affect label, you really tell somebody what they are experiencing. The emotional centers are inhibited, and at the same time, the right ventrolateral prefrontal cortex, the executive function of the brain, is activated. And within 90 seconds, calm is restored. It happens to every single human brain, and you cannot resist it. You cannot remain angry when somebody is affect labeling you.
So how does someone put this into practice? Because this sounds like a superpower.
It is a superpower. It's the foundational skill of life. Is
it easy to learn?
It's easy to learn if you have a little bit of courage in the beginning, because it's counterintuitive and counternormative. But it's 3 simple steps, really easy to describe. Then we'll talk about what you have to do. So you're confronted with an angry person, or perhaps you have 2 angry people that you have to calm. The first thing you're going to do is ignore their angry words. So if you're shouting at me, I'm going to just ignore you. Completely not ignore you, but ignore what you're saying. I don't care. Yeah. You can say whatever you want. I've heard it all before. No,
water off a duck's back.
Exactly. So that's going to create white noise. 2 things happen when I can ignore your words. 1, I'm not going to get triggered.
Yep.
And 2, I'm going to free up bandwidth to do the next 2 steps. Step number 2 is I'm going to read your emotions. I'm going to read your emotional data fields. Emotions are data, just like numbers on a spreadsheet. And we have an innate ability as humans to read each other's emotional data, except that we've just never had an opportunity to use this skill. And this all I did a bunch of research in evolutionary biology to see where this came from. And it's fascinating. As humans, we've only had the ability to speak, to have language, for less than 230,000 years. So for the millions of years before that, how did hominids communicate? They communicated through emotional expression and grunts and utterances, but not words. So our brains are highly attuned to what other people are feeling. And all we have to do is get out of our own way, and we can read their emotions. And basically the process is to simply be in silence, empty your mind, and just be patient. And in a few moments, your brain will start processing what's going on, and the emotions that the person is experiencing will come up in you. And then the third step is to do a very simple declarative sentence. You are angry. You're frustrated. There's a way I structure this, but basically you're going to repeat back the emotions that you think the other person is experiencing with a simple you statement. You're not going to ask any questions. You're never going to say, what are you feeling right now? Or are you angry? No, never ask a question. And
you're not doing that, I feel like you're angry.
No I statements. No I. You're going to use a direct you statement. So I would say, for example, Nicole, you're really, really angry. You're frustrated. You feel disrespected and ignored. Nobody's listening to you. You feel completely unappreciated and unsupported. And you're really anxious and worried and a little scared. And you're a little embarrassed. And you're sad and upset and distressed and feel some grief. and you feel completely betrayed and rejected and abandoned, as if you were completely unlovable. Now, there's a sequence that I use in this that I teach.
I'm feeling that already, and you're not even talking to me.
That's right. And so what do you feel? What do you feel, even though you're not upset at all?
I feel very calm. It's actually quite calming. It's quite fascinating.
And the other thing that you feel is, wow, he really gets me. You can't help but calm down with this. That's what the neuroscience shows. And so now they calm down, and now you're ready to enter into problem solving, which could be a lot of times all you got to do is get people de-escalated and they can solve their own problems.
Yeah. Or
you can provide what I call results-based listening, which is a way of helping people solve their own problems without giving advice. Then you can move into, the next step would be to move into what we call interest-based negotiation, or integrated negotiation. And then if that doesn't work, then maybe distributed negotiation. So you have you can rising levels of intrusion into their process to help them solve the problem. And negotiation falls kind of in the middle of the continuum. And that's how you do it.
You make it sound so simple.
Well, it is simple once you are confident that it'll work. But the problem is that it's weird in the beginning telling somebody what they're feeling. It feels like it's rude or manipulative or patronizing.
And that was the questions as you were going through that list before. I'm sitting there thinking, but what if you mislabel their emotions?
Oh, it doesn't matter. If I said, Nicole, you're really angry, and you said, no, I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated. Or more likely you would say, I'm not angry, I'm just frustrated. Like that, right? So clearly you're angry, but you can't process the anger. So you give me the correction. You say, I'm frustrated. I said, yeah, you're frustrated. You're really disrespected. This is all unfair. You don't feel like anybody's listening to you. Yeah. And it really, really makes you angry. Yeah. And that's how it works. So almost always, if you get it wrong, normally you won't get it wrong, but maybe the other person just can't process the emotion, say, no, I'm not that and this. You repeat back what they said, give them a couple of more emotions to chew on, and then go back to the anger, and they'll say, yeah, I'm really angry.
Yeah.
You're never wrong. You cannot be wrong in this process.
I love it. I'm going to be definitely reading up some more about this and adding it to my toolbox, Doug. It's interesting because, I think as somebody who mediates and deals with a lot of angry people, I feel like I've got some good strategies to do that, but I'm desperate to try this out now. I really want to mediate with a really angry person now.
I suggest that you practice it first. And the way I tell people to practice.
I can practice on my teenagers. There's plenty of anger there.
There you go. Or do it the way that I suggest is you go to really safe, low-risk social situations. Favorite laboratory is Starbucks. You can go into Starbucks, give the barista your credit card, your debit card, place your order, and say, hey, you look really happy today. You look really excited. You got a lot of energy. Very positive, upbeat, one reflection, and watch what happens.
Fantastic. So you can use this on positive emotions as well as negative emotions.
It's great to use with children too.
Yeah.
But you do the positive emotion because it's a lot safer. And two, if you do that after you've done it 10 or 15 times, say over a 2 or 3 week period, you're going to see the same reaction every single time. You're going to start, oh my God, this stuff really works.
Yeah.
And then that gives you the confidence to take on something that's a little more difficult.
Fantastic. I'm loving this. I'm loving it. So what else do we need to know? What else do we need to know about this?
Well, when you master this skill, you're going to stop fights and arguments in your life forever. You will never have another fight or argument in your life forever. You will build instant loyalty, trust, and rapport. So if you're a leader, a business leader, for example, this is a skill you want to use to take emotional safety and psychological safety on your team, to your direct reports. In your personal life, you'll build instant intimacy with your partner, with your children, with your family, because people have a deep need to be heard and validated. And for most people, they have never been heard or validated at a deep level. When you listen them into existence, what I call this process, they are extraordinarily grateful and feel the same kind of relaxed contentment, satisfaction that you experience, even though you're totally neutral emotionally. Yeah. The trick, it's like riding a bike. You got to practice.
Yes.
You got to practice until it becomes habitual. And it typically takes my clients that I coach 4 to 6, sometimes 8 weeks to really dial it in.
Yeah, I can imagine that, because it is quite a change. And, I guess with all of these things, the older you are, the longer you've been doing things differently, and the harder it is to change.
Well, it's a new practice. And so the reason that I encourage people to get coaching on this, either group coaching or individualized coaching, is because the coach is going to provide the accountability and support.
Yeah.
So if we were in a session right now and I was teaching you this, I would say, okay, Nicole, your task is to go out and read and label emotions in 3 different situations over the next week. And we're going to meet again next Thursday. And I want you to and journal everything that happens and come back and you're going to report to me what happened. Now, you know that you got to go out and do it. And so you will do it and you'll come back. Or if you don't do it, that's great. We can say, well, the barriers have gotten in the way. And typically it's fear because we're afraid of putting ourselves out there. We're afraid that we're going to be vulnerable, that we're going to be attacked, that we're going to be repudiated, that we're going to get rejected. It's all inside ourselves. Yeah. It never happens, but that's just the fear we have. And so it takes a coach to help you overcome these psychological hurdles that you put up in front of yourself. And then once you've done it enough, you will never go back any other way because you just see how powerful it is. I'll tell you another story. This is a story out of the prison project. Laurel and I started the project in 2010 in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world. And about the 4th week in, we went into this dingy conference room. There's no nice place in prison to teach. It's not corporate America, believe me. And one of our students, Sarah, was sitting over in a corner quietly sobbing. She got into class first. So we walked over and Laurel kneeled next to her and said, "What's going on?" And she told us this story. She said, "I've been in prison for 18 years. 18 years ago, I was an alcoholic and I killed a family of 4 as a drunk driver. And when I had to go to prison, I was sentenced to 25 years to life. And when I was sentenced, I had to give up my 3-year-old boy to my sister, and she's raised him ever since. I've written him a letter every single week for the last 18 years. I've never heard from him. He's never written me back. No phone calls, no visits, nothing. The only thing I know about him is what my sister reports to me every week when we have a phone call." Well, after last week's class, I decided to write a different kind of letter. And I just tried to think about all the emotions he must be feeling about a mother who totally abandoned him, who was so selfish and so injured and weak, and that all she could do was drink and not even think about the dangers that she was causing anybody else. So I wrote him that letter, just really affect labeled how he must, for the last 18 years, or 21 years, rather, what he had experienced. And then she started to cry again. And she held up a letter and said, "For the first time, he's written back."
Wow.
And he said that he was very angry. And he has a right to be angry. But at the bottom of the letter, he said, "I love you, Mom. I'm bringing my girlfriend and we'll come visit you in 3 weeks."
Wow.
All he needed from her was to be heard.
To be heard and recognized. Amazing. Powerful stuff, Doug. This has been a fantastic chat. I've loved it. I'm sure our listeners are going to really enjoy it. How do people learn more about this? Where can they go to get some more information if they want to dig a little deeper? And that might not be our listeners, but it's definitely me.
My website is Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.com. Lots of free resources on the website. And I've got online courses. You can get my book, my 4th book, De-Escalate. And you can, of course, contact me. I provide group coaching sessions for people who are trying to improve their skills in a group situation. And I also do individual coaching for people who really want to go deep, not only for themselves, but maybe they want to teach this or, take it to a different level. And you can just, on the website, you can get to just reach out to me. My email is doug@dougnoll.com. I'm a solo practitioner. I don't have a staff. I don't even have a virtual assistant. So,
I know how that feels.
It's nice. And so when you reach out to me, you will get a response from me directly.
Fantastic.
And I've got a YouTube channel called The Power of Emotional Competency. And on that channel are a whole bunch of videos that talk about all of this stuff and applications of how you use this and that sort of thing. So I'm out there. You can find me.
I love it. And I love the generosity that comes with being able to put all of these resources out so people can develop their skills and we can just make the world a better place.
The way I see it, Nicole, is that when you learn how to listen in this way, you listen somebody into existence, you're throwing a little pebble into the pond of peace. Well, that's just one little ripple. But what happens when 100 people start doing it every day, and then 1,000 people, and then 1,000,000? It's no longer a ripple, it's a tsunami.
Absolutely.
And that's how we spread.
I'm going to go and start throwing some pebbles. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I have so much enjoyed our chat, and I'm sure there's lots more and more stories. So I may just have to have you back again another time, Doug.
Absolutely, Nicole. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks very much.
That's all for this episode of the Negotiation in Real Life podcast. I hope you enjoyed our discussion and learned something new that you can apply in your own negotiations. Remember, negotiation is a skill that can be developed and refined over time, so keep practicing and pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can find us on social media or email us directly. And if you liked this episode, please leave us a review on your favourite podcast platform. It helps us to reach more people and continue to produce high-quality content. Until next time, keep negotiating in real life.